Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this series, which is going on by Media and Entertainment Skills Council and GMEC. Yes, Vidyadan and Creative Warrior brings to you a lot of workshops and sessions. And this time it's on brain behavior. When we talk about brain behavior, I think there's a lot to learn and a lot to know about brain behavior. And to describe the same, today we have Professor Diwakar Shukla ji. So, most welcome on the platform of Vidyadan.
Thank you so much, Pooja. Thank you so much. A pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So, before Sir actually starts his session, I'd like to take this privilege to introduce him. Professor Diwakar Shukla is a Dean of Faculty of Journalism and Creative Studies at Jagran Lake City University. He also heads the Advancement and International Relations Department and is a member of a leadership board at the university. He has more than 2 decades of experience in the field of communication with various premier organizations like Ogilvy, World Bank, Indian Express, along with projects from the EU and Dutch bilateral program. As a former managing partner at Ogilvy, he designed and led various award-winning campaigns in social marketing, cause marketing, media, and CSR for the global brand portfolio, including HBS, Hindustan Unilever, USAID, Castrol, Hong Kong Disneyland, WHO, DU Point, Rolls-Royce Motor Cars, and I have a lot to talk about him, but would like to add one thing. He's a member of the core team by UNICEF for updating its syllabus on social and behavior change in communication. So good to have you here, Professor Diwakar Shukla. I really wish I could go on with your introduction. It's
No,
so
no, so
vast and it covers so many things you have
thank,
done.
thank you so much, Pooja. It's over the years you work with such brilliant people that you end up doing many things which make you happy eventually in your career or in your life. I think I've just been lucky that I have had some brilliant professors and seniors working with me and my colleagues. So it's all fun.
Yeah, when fun work is fun, then there's no tiredness. And today you're talking about brain behavior.
Yes.
So let's learn about brain behavior. I'll hand over the session to you, Professor Shukla.
Perfect. So what I've done is I've just put on my slide for everyone to see. I this is something not which I have only created. This is years and years of work which scientists, communication specialists, professionals have done it, professors who have come up with this. uh, I was, and this is something that I always give credit to, as far as this topic is concerned, is to one of my former bosses, I would say former mentor, Christopher Graves, who actually is phenomenal. And Pooja, like you rightly said it, when I was working with Ogilvy, I think that place is so amazing in terms of what they do and how they do, that invariably all of us who are part of that particular system learned many things related to how communication works. And communication is just not about tools and techniques, but also about understanding about the human behavior itself. And I think from there came the fact that how humans behave is something we need to understand, or the brain itself, we need to understand it. And if you are able to do that, then it becomes comparatively, kind of a, I wouldn't say easier path, but comparatively a manageable path to embark on a communication journey where you want to change people's behavior, you want to persuade them in some way, you want to nudge them in some way, either for the brands, for policy making, for health communication, for wherever you want to work in. So I think it's, I would say, a issue agnostic kind of a topic, but I think it is very important because the first time that I started kind of reading about it, listening to it, I realized that it's an amazing area to work in. Number one. Two, it is again, idea is to understand it fully, where exactly this storytelling takes and how does it really kind of culminate into some kind of a behavioral changes. And you can deploy it in the areas that you may be. If you're from a legal perspectives, you can use it in their context. If you're from a management, then you use it in management. If you're a media communication professional, you do it. uh, if you look at it, the filmmakers, the animators do it brilliantly because they have some amazing abilities to understand what triggers what kind of a behavior in kids or in adults. And I think they are able to use those flags very, very well. So I thought it would be interesting, kind of topic or the theme which I can discuss about. So it's kind of an obsessive journey for me as well now. And and essentially, if you look at it, the whole thing, the journey that I'm talking about, essentially starts from here. So this is nothing else but, as you saw, it is a brain, and it has various impulses, various triggers. So idea was this is more of a scan of a brain, which is kind of read what is happening whenever this particular image has been taken. So it's all happens actually in the brain. I mean, that's where this particular topic of brain behavior and story. Now, if you look at it, anything that you know about the three major things, fallacies, so to say, which are there, frankly speaking, in terms of the human understanding about brain behavior and story. So the three big things which humans have actually, if you ask me, got it all wrong, essentially are related to these three things. So one is that, whatever we knew about how humans decide, essentially, I think we were wrong. Many times we do not actually know how humans actually decide. Second was that if we thought that we know how to change people's behavior or change people's mind, I think if we thought that we knew it, I think we were all wrong because we really did not know about it. And also, most important is if we knew how the science and creativity come together, and we can know and we know how to craft narratives to fire neurons in our head. If we knew that all together, and if we thought that as human beings or as human species we knew it, I think we had got it wrong. So these are the three things which actually, if you look at it 150 years back, we did not really actually understand it fully. And there were three accidents which happened since last about 150 years in a history of human species, or I would say three instances which taught us to decode this storytelling and brain and communication and behavior in a very, very interesting way. So I wanted to discuss about the three accident per se which comes to my mind, which I need to share with you. And I think these three accidents to some extent would tell all of you how people actually decide and what happens when you tell their stories, and how you can utilize theories or narratives for changing some kind of a behaviors as well, right? So the first thing is where I started, the story starts, the accident one, which I want to discuss with you. It started in 1848. This was in Vermont in USA. Uh, During that point of time, the railway tracks were being laid in Vermont. And usually as a part of laying down of the railway tracks, there was a team which used to work. As part of the team, there was this gentleman, I think many of the psychologists may know about it. His name was Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage essentially was a supervisor and a foreman who was working in the railway construction company. His job was to essentially, if you look at it, his job was to, whenever he saw the big boulders and a stone in front of the track where the tracks were supposed to be laid, he used to drill the hole in that particular block of stone, the boulder, put the gunpowder into it, push that gunpowder with the iron rod which is holding, and then light the fuse, and kaboom, the rock used to break, and actually the site used to get cleared and the railway tracks were drawn. Now, once while he was doing this, the fuse went, lit a slightly earlier than the timer that he had set for himself. When it happened, obviously the stone broke into many pieces, but along with this particular blast, this iron rod came hurling down from the site of the mountain or the place that it was kept, and actually pierced his skull and came out from his cheek, just below the cheek, something of this nature, right? Now, it's a very gory and a very weird kind of a accident which you can know of. And he was taken to the hospital. He stayed in the hospital for about 10, 11 months. Idly, he survived. That itself was a miracle. And he came back on the construction site to start working again. But something has changed in Phineas Gage at that point of time. Initially, before the accident, he was pretty loved by his own set of people. People used to like him. He was able to take decisions. He was able to connect emotionally with people. But post-accident, something had changed in him, and he stopped connecting with people. He stopped connecting with people. Most importantly, he was unable to take decisions as well. So something was wrong. And years later, one of the well-known scientists, Antonio Damasio, and along with his wife, Hannah Damasio, and the team of scientists that they were working, they picked up the skull, which is still there in New York, as a part of the museum out there, and they recreated the brain from this particular skull using the CAD/CAM techniques. And interestingly, they found different aspects to the brain, and especially in context to Phineas Gage, which actually threw up startling understanding to Antonio Damasio and eventually to everybody of it. So as you all know, in our brain, we have two walnut-sized parts to it, which is called amygdala, which are essentially the raw emotions, if you ask me. They are often called as a flight and fight emotions as well. Uh, Usually in human beings, amygdala starts developing pretty early. But at a later stage, around 21, 22, is when the prefrontal cortex also starts developing. And prefrontal cortex essentially is a moderating part of the brain. Uh, so if you're going in a forest and you see a stick, you know, a person of my age would see that and would not run away, because then my rationalization brain or my prefrontal cortex part of my brain would say that this is really not the snake, it is a stick. But if a child goes there closer to that from the distance, they would see that this is more of a snake and may run away or even actually start stamping on it also. So there is a flight and fight emotion. So this parts of brain, which is the amygdala, as I talked about, essentially gave us a huge understanding to Antonio Damasio, and they eventually came back and they said that as human beings, we are not thinking machines, we are feeling machines, because the part of the brain which was destroyed when the iron rod went into Phineas Gage's skull, the amygdala had been destroyed. So the raw emotions part of it got destroyed. His ability to take action, decisions, everything went away because of that particular damage which happened in his brain. So Antonio Damasio in his book actually came up with the fact that we are not thinking machines as human beings often are seen to be. We are feeling machines who think. So without our emotions, we are unable to reason. That's a very interesting way, because many of the times in communication and media, you say there's a logical side to it and there's an emotional side to it, magical side to it. So logic and the emotions that we work with. But here was Antonio Damasio who said that we are feeling machines who think. So entire perspective of how decision making is done is not only based on facts, figures, thinking, rationalization, but based on feelings, based on emotions. And I think this was a huge understanding which came into being, which actually propelled us as human beings to start thinking of emotions as something which can actually be used to nudge people to change the behaviors in a wider way. And you'll see that happening in your daily lives wherever you go. So I think that's the first accident, which is very important. If you also hear Baba Shiv, who's one of the foremost management consultants, and you'll understand what he's also saying in the same light.
Most of our decisions, whether we like it or not, most of our actions, most of our behavior, most of our experiences are constantly being shaped at the instinctual level. I would argue that about 90 to 95% of our decisions, even important decisions, you might think that you're being rational, but keep in mind that if you pit the rational brain against the emotional brain, in general, it is the emotional brain that is going to win out. In fact, I have this quote out there which says that the rational brain it's not good at being rational. What it is good at is simply rationalize what the emotional brain has already decided to do. And therefore, it behooves us to understand the workings of the instinctual emotional brain.
Very interesting what Baba Shiv said. They said that it's very times when you say that I have been able to, my logical side of my brain is taking a decision. Many times we say it when we are facing with a situation. What Baba Shiv says, if you pit the rational brain and the emotional brain against each other, invariably the emotional brain would always win. And that's the whole point he was trying to make, that whenever you are in a situation and you think that you are trying to get logic to take a particular, or use logic to take a particular decision, it says, and this is what he means, is that it's actually you're just trying to rationalize the decision which the emotional side of your brain has already taken. And that's a huge statement, which essentially tells you that no matter what, it's the emotional side of a human behavior, a human mind, which is predominantly taking many of the decisions. Yes, you do use logic, you do use rational, thought around it, you use facts around it. But remember, emotional side is a very predominant side in all human species. That was the first accident which brought us to the fact that there is something else when it when a decision making is made. Let's look at the second decision making, which happened essentially when this particular research article was brought in by Professor Charles Lord. Very interesting. And the article itself was based, and if you are a scientist, then you would definitely want to read this particular article and the way that it is written, that bias assimilation and attitude polarization, the effects of prior theories on subsequently considered evidence. Because every time when there is a scientific journal or a scientific explanation that you're giving, it seems to be a very complex phenomenon for people who do not understand science and technology and sociology, psychology. But if you really look at this, and if you have to explain it to somebody what this particular article is all about, if you had gone to a restaurant and somebody asked me what exactly was this particular article all about, to simplify it, you can always say that this article essentially deals with things, with people, where if you believe in something, how much of a new facts which are given to you can actually change your belief. So it's all about, if you believe in something, can new facts, new evidences can change your belief in that particular thing? Is it possible? This article is all about that. And many of the media professors and media practitioners who may be out here would understand that this essentially, we have studied a lot about it, and we know about that there's something called a confirmation bias. That if you believe in something, even if the new evidences are given to you, you consistently keep on believing the things which you have been conditioned with. That's a confirmation bias, or like many people call in a motivating reasoning, or the filter bubble, so to say. And Professor Charles Lord article on this, along with Lee Ross and Mark Lipper, was something of a seminal kind of a work which happened in this particular space. And I think it brings a good question to fore: is there something more to decision making and behaving than just simple facts and figures? For example, this particular book by David Weston, The Political Brain, it's interestingly, based on experiments which are done by Drew Weston. And one of the experiments which he talks about in this particular book, again, going to the second accident, as I talked about, is saying that if there are two groups of people, one of the groups of people believes in a particular political candidate or a leader, while the other groups believes in another political leader. They all have their own reasons to believe in their political leaders. And this experiment was done where the two groups were given facts and figures about their respective leaders, talking good things about those leaders. And the moment I believe in a leader A, and say, for example, Pooja believes in leader B. So I was given all facts and figures which said that my political leader A is really, really very good. All good things about him or her. Whereas Pooja was given all evidences related to political leader B, everything good about her or him. And obviously, we as supporters of that particular political leader felt extremely happy. We said, wow, this is exactly what I was saying. My leader is really good in that sense. But this game was set up, this experiment was set up. What was done was the scientists actually changed the facts and figures. So Pooja was given something negative about the political leader B, and also something good about my leader, which is leader A. The same thing was done with me. And the idea was that if I get new facts and figures which talk about some weaknesses of my political leader or the leader itself, I would change my beliefs. I would change my perception about my own leader, because the new facts and figures have come in front of me. But what really happened was that I became polarized, and I became more firmer believer of my political leader. Now, something is wrong here, because I was given new facts which should have told me that my leader, who was following, is really also has a weak side of it, and I should have admitted to it. But I did not. I became polarized. Now you see what is happening in the world today. More facts and figures you give it to somebody, more polarized that particular situation becomes. So this logic, which you often work with, if you give new facts and figures and evidences for something which you want to change, it will change the behavior. That's completely wrong. And this particular book and this particular experiment proved that. So there's something else which happens, and that's where the confirmation bias part of it comes very, very strongly. And we need to keep that in mind how we work it. And again, the question of understanding the brain behavior of these individuals was taken into account. Interestingly, this book also had something very, very interesting part of, I've just highlighted a portion where he says that what we saw instead was a network of emotion circuits lining up. When they were given facts and figures, the new some parts of our brain certainly kind of, lit up very strongly, and which pointed toward the fact that there's a huge amount of emotional decision making which is done by human species when you're facing a situation, whether in your favor or not in your favor, right? You all have, I mean, in fact, all of us have gone through this pandemic, right? Huge amount of myths about vaccines came up. There was a vaccine hesitancy which has come up. And no matter how much you try to influence people to take vaccines, initially there was a slow offtake of vaccine as well. So debunking of myths which are associated with vaccine, does it work? Why is it that it was not convincing the people? There are different reasons to it. One of the first ones was that if you keep on arguing around the facts, it really doesn't work. So anytime you want to persuade somebody, anytime that you want to change somebody's behavior and you say, okay, I'll give you the facts which should change your behavior, believe me, it would only make matters worse. So giving facts does not mean anything when you're wanting to change behavior. Second part is, if you want to, by repeating the myth, any rumor or myth, you inadvertently polarize it. And you all know this scourge of fake news. Now, fake news, misinformation, it's about what? The news itself, to be honest, is not so deadly, not so internecine, and not so deadly when you talk of fake news. It's a virality, it's a reverberations of that particular news. It's a sharing of that particular news over and over and over again, which actually makes it a truth. So repeating the myth inadvertently polarizes it. This is something which is again very, very unique. That's the reason in a fake news situation, we say, do not share with anybody else. Do not forward it to anybody else, because we want to break the cycle. That's another thing. So if you keep on repeating the myth, you only polarize the myth. You make the myth more stronger in that particular sense. So I think that's again something which our brain is able to take it. Affirmation works, but we rarely use it. For example, if I have to say something to somebody and if I have a different view altogether, I don't have to give new facts and figures. I don't have to give a logic. I don't have to give my side of the story always. You need to acknowledge other person's perspectives and then work around it. I think most of the times human brains takes affirmation much better than if you are arguing something. And the last part, which is very important, which is a outcome of the second accident, is that we consistently underestimate the power of narrative. And I think this is something that I want to take it forward. Interesting book. People who have read it, great. If you've not read it, get hold of it from somewhere on the net or someplace and read this Charles Seffy book, which is Proofiness. So if you want to get people to believe in something really stupid, just stick a number to it. So there's a logic which says that if you put a scientific jargon around something, if you put a facts and numbers around something, if you put a pie chart around something, that content which seems to be really stupid, doesn't have any sense to it, suddenly starts getting credibility around it. Why does it happen? Why does our mind actually latch on to the numbers and this scientific talk many times when the content actually means nothing, right? And this is an experiment which was again done, that when something was really not very credible, you put some numbers to it, and suddenly the entire content and piece becomes extremely persuasive, so to say. And that's another thing which comes why our brain latches on to the numbers and those things. So 4 principles of our human behavior in this context is, people are irrational. We talked about earlier about why we are feeling machines which think, not just the thinking machines. We don't use so much of a logic. We may say that we are looking logic, but we are rationalizing the thought which the emotional side of the brain has already taken. So keep this in mind. Second point, which is very important as a part of a behavior, is that context do matter. When you're talking to somebody, when you're setting up a new speech, when you're giving a session to your classmates, when you're taking a new project in offices, I think the setting up of a context around that particular core objective or the core task which you're supposed to do makes things much easier. Human mind wants context, because as many of you know, Tony Wazon in his mind mapping pioneering work had also said that human works on associations. Our brain works on memories. So we have words, colors, those things are kind of context in which our brain gets the understanding about the world. So context matters a lot. Set up the context of things and it will become easier. The third part, which is very interesting, and I always look at it and I say, maybe this is true, as the brain is extremely lazy place, very, very lazy, right? So this number, if I just showed it to you and I move on to it, I'm pretty sure that you would not have read this number. If I forced you to read it, you would have seen the number, you have got the context of it, but you would not have read the number because the brain would not want to read so much 7, 8, 4, 9, 3, 6, 7, 8. You would not read it like that. You will see some numbers, you'll move it. So usually don't give too many numbers expecting that the brain would be able to catch it. It would not be able to catch it because, not because we are not sharp, not because we are not alert. It is because we are too lazy to read numbers and things like that. So try not to do things which actually makes the brain work over. Like pushing the brain to read it and forcing the brain to read something doesn't really work. And many times it actually becomes a counterproductive. The brain shuts off, goes back in its own shell, says, it's not relevant. I would not want to read it. And that's something which happened. Another example why the brain is lazy. In US, an experiment was done where the entire menu card of a restaurant for children, you have many things listed on a menu card in any of the restaurant. What they did was the default menu which was coming had many things which were consciously plotted there, which were all very healthy. So before the experiment, the observation was that people order many things which are unhealthy. But the moment the menu card, the configuration was changed, the default menu was created, which was a healthy menu. The brain did not take it and make an effort to understand and go behind the last pages to see whatever they love it. They just took it up what was suggested to them. And that is again a manifestation of the fact that the brain is a lazy place many times. So use it to your advantage where you want to change behaviors and impress and persuade somebody. For example, if I give you this kind of a scenario, when you decide to conserve energy, how important for you are the following: environmental protection, you do that, or for the social benefits, saving money, or what others people do. Most of the people take 1, 2, or 3. I want to save money, that's why I'm conserving energy, or it is benefit for the environment, good for the country and whatnot. And this is how people usually rate why they save energy. But the real situation is, if you ask deeply is, and you talk to more people, this is where it comes. We save energies because we see others also getting lesser bills in colonies, in mohallas, in various apartment housing complexes. Many times what other people do makes a hell of a big difference to us and in our lives. Now you can take a learning out of it. This is often in kids also, this is seen as a peer kind of influencing. So keep in mind that the brain is not only working on a rationale of saving environment, it is also working what others are doing it. And this is where the role of influencers comes in very handy. Role of the peers comes very handy. And these are only ways in which the brain behaves. And if we know this, we can always utilize it for persuasion and changing behaviors. So is there a better way to change minds and people's behavior? Yes, there is. It's called narrative transportation. Many times you call it as a storytelling as well, right? He's Professor Raymond Card. He has done some amazing similar work in University of York. And his core area of work, if you look at it, is in the space of how people imagine things. And when you have a great sense of imagination, when you have a great sense of purpose about something, you are invariably telling your brain to achieve that as well. That's the reason many times we tell each other to imagine, to be curious enough, to talk about it, to kind of envision the many things. If you do not have ability of imagining, curiosity, and envisioning things, brain somehow would not drive you towards achieving that particular thing. And I think his study around imagination, how brain behaves, is particularly very significant in context to whatever we are talking about. So I think that's another piece of advice. The imagining and the curiosity and the envisioning part of what you're wanting to do is a very, very important process. It's not something which randomly happens and we do not give importance to. I think it has to be understood very, very well, right? Let's come to the action 3. Action 3 actually happened with this particular gentleman who honestly speaking, I love him a lot in terms of, because his work has been pretty seminal in that context, Giacomo Rizzolotti. Now, what he did was essentially he was trying to understand human behavior in different contexts. One of the experiments which he did with his team members was where he had a monkey and he was trying to understand the motor functions. He had a monkey and he got the monkey and he put the sensors and mappers on his brain and on his head. This monkey was given things to eat. So nuts were given to this monkey, and every time the nut was given to this particular monkey, there was a sound which used to come like this. Every time the monkey was given the nut, there was a sound on the meters, on the what you call the speakers, because the sensors were already, probes were already placed on his head, on his brain. Every time he was given this particular nut, and the sound used to come like this, right? Now, the sound used to come like this, perfectly fine, because the monkey was enjoying that particular nut and knew what the nuts is all about. There was a sound, grazometer. But once what happens when the nut was given to him, one of the scientists in Giacomo Rizzolotti's team picked up the nut and ate it himself. This gentleman never had the probes on his head or the brain. Monkey had it. But again, the sound, kind of a sound came out of it. Now, Rizzolotti actually thought what happened, because the monkey did not eat the nut. It was a human who did eat the nut. But why did that sound came up from monkey's brain? Now, that actually brought to fore in front of the human species this particular concept of neurocoupling. Many times, mentally, we are connected to each other as human species. When you're communicating in a situation, when you're in a hall, when you're in a session, when wherever you are, there are many times which you can utilize this capacity of storytelling. But it cannot happen that I'm standing here and you're standing there and we are just able to get a neurocouple. No, it does not happen. I need to do some action. I need to say something. I need to laugh, or I need to act something for you to get connected to my kind of a storytelling, my kind of a thinking. Neurocoupling is a fact which exists, but it needs a lot of storytelling, lot of understanding of how the narrative has to be crafted. If you have the capacity to understand, and if you know that there is a concept called neurocoupling, it does happen, mirror neurons are there, then actually if you look at it, you can create a neural ballet, right? I say something, but you understand it even before I finish my sentence. Many times it does happen. So I think the third accident where this particular aspect was brought to forth, brought again a new understanding how the brain behaves. And these things are already available, scientifically proven as well. It's not something, but I think as communication professionals, as communication or academicians or even professionals, we need to utilize these particular aspects and fuse it into part of the storytelling. You would have all heard many times we say storytelling. Many times storytelling is also myth, because it does away with many things which should go scientifically as a part of a story or the part of a narrative. We miss out on that. Now, in that case, the story fails. In that case, none of this will happen. None of the behavioral changes happen. So it's not, the problem is not about the storytelling. Problem is how we are going to deploy it and where. And that's why the best of the communicators, whether it is a filmmaker, animators, they are able to do it. I mean, we know, we see it, we get impacted by it, right? Many of you who have seen the earlier versions of Star Trek, you know that there was something called telepathy, the mind mending kind of a building kind of a thing. So these things scientifically in fiction also has been thought years back. But today, Star Trek has come true if you look at it, right? I'll show you a quick video how when we see things, we start behaving also. Sorry, just give me a second. It looks like rain again today. Dark clouds gather, fill the sky. Don't know how to talk to you, just know how to say goodbye. You actually got it right, it's lights out. Go back where you came from. Learn to speak. Go back where you came from. You saw how interesting this particular, I mean, this was a public service film which was made, but how interesting it is. Just by seeing, you are able to change the behaviors. Now, is there something else to it? Of course, because our mind actually wants to shape up to whatever they observe and sees. So it's a very funny way in which the brain has to be understood and taken into cognizance when we are talking of communication or even the storytelling part of it. So it's not just a neuroscience alone on it, on a scientific pillars, but also the neuroscience of storytelling, which is important. Now, what does it mean is going back to what I said earlier, The thoughts in a in terms of the stories, thoughts actually flow like stories in our brains. Stories about events, stories about people, stories about intentions, about achievements, and so many things. So our brain has been wired to tell and understand stories. The brain is a story seeking, story creating instrument, if you look at it. And this is something which is very profound if you really start thinking about it. And we do it. It happens in our daily lives every time it happens. But when it comes to the professional communication, when it comes to really crafting persuasive communication to change behaviors, we often tend to forget and we immediately start relying on facts, figures, numbers, rational side of the brain rather than what is natural to us as human beings. I think that's the important piece, right? Now, many times you see that narrative is also often used in place of good data to claim impacts. So in the battle, as Baba Shiv had said, in the battle of hearts and minds, it's the narrative or the emotional side which would always win, always outperform the data side of it. Now, if we fail to grasp this, the best of communication, the best of persuasive communication would fail because we have not crafted our communication in such a way which actually kind of relates to the other person's brain, the audience's brain, the consumer's brain. We have often failed to see that. Now, if you fail to do that, no matter how creative you are, no matter how many facts and figures you have it, no matter how many pie charts you keep it is not going to deliver the kind of impact as you have intended to. Vis-a-vis, if you understand what the context of that article, context of that speech is, context of that communication is, and you understand what the audiences actually are looking for, there's a high chance that you'll be able to do it. And again, I go back to the best of animation films or for that matter, films itself. You'd see how beautifully they are able to craft it, including the written pieces as well. And that's something very, very simple to understand, but we often miss out on that, right? So reason is that the human brain has difficulty connecting emotionally with data, even as expert analysis of data. And also emotion that typically produces the motivation necessary. Emotion actually produces that motivation to understand and get the active response from the audience as you're doing, because our brain wants that story. It's a seeking story. It's a story seeking instrument, as I said it earlier in Frank Smith itself. So 4 parts: dopamine, you all know about it, which is the brain which releases that dopamine system when you experience something very emotional. Cortex activity, which rationalizes many more things. It just gets activated the moment you have stories floating around your brain and yourself. Neurocoupling, I said it, which is kind of a connected with 2 parts to it. And mirroring, many times when you see somebody smiling, you start smiling. When you see somebody crying or saying something, you start kind of feeling sad about it. And that's something which our brain is able to grasp very quickly and move it forward on that, right? Now see what happens in James Bond movies, for example. It is quiet and dark, the theater is hushed. James Bond skirts around this edge of a building as his enemy takes aim. Here in the audience, rates increase and palms sweat. If you dig deeper, you'll understand that what you're watching is really the neuro ballet, as I talked about earlier, which is a storyline changes the people's activity. Now, if you see a movie, of course you'll see it happening, but even if you're able to write it, see how the best authors are able to do it. Actually bring alive the proposition for you. Why do you like that? Is because your ability to imagine what has been written is perfect. And then suddenly you are able to immerse yourself in those words, in those texts, in those copies, in your scripts, and you're able to get some enjoyment out of it, or actually get impacted by it also, right? So there's always a situation whereby do not always tell things, as people say, in terms of communication. And this directly comes from the brain and behavior part of it. Do not always tell, show things to them. So I'm giving you 2 lines. If I just tell you he felt depressed, of course you'll understand that somebody is feeling depressed. But if I paint a picture for you of saying that for 6 or 7 days we had not moved from the standing sofa, you could tell it must be getting toward dinner time, as he could no longer make the titles of the book across the room in the dark. But he had not been hungry since she had left. He could not remember the last time he had left the room. You can start getting the sense of what is happening with this person. Either that the person in his life has left, the person has died, some person has just abandoned him, whatever has happened. And if I gave you a chance to further develop this particular story, you'll be able to do it much, much better than many of the authors. Vis-a-vis, if I just told you he felt depressed, yes, you would feel that something happened. and the person is depressed, but you not be able to immerse yourself. So I think it's very important to illustrate, to expand, to show things in a more of a more of an intelligent way than just giving a cryptic messages, scripted things, imagining that the brain would on itself would make an effort and understand it. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen this way. This is a brilliant book which I recommend to anybody who's interested in knowing about communication, about storytelling. Read this book, written by Chip Heath and Dan Heath, the brothers. And they have this very simple ways in which they have said why some story work very well. Why do they have some of the sticky factors? And what are these sticky factors? Your stories have to be simple. Whatever you're saying, it has to be simple enough, whether it is a classrooms or your boardrooms, wherever you are. It has to be simple. You make a complex story, nobody would latch on to it. It has to be unexpected. There should be twists and turns and expected things, because our brain loves surprises. And that's why you love the movies which have a huge amount of surprise to it, twist and turns to it. We love those movies. It should be concrete. And I'll come to concrete a bit later. It has to be very, very concrete. You cannot be just talking fluffy language without any sense to it. It has to have some concreteness to the entire thing. It has to be credible. Believability has to be there. And of course, it has to be emotional. It has to tickle the emotional side of my brain or the audience's brain. And the moment you do that, your story starts taking shape, starts becoming more credible. People relate to it and people latch on to it. Don't use these mind numbing words in your lexicon, in your scripts, in your places. I mean, professionally, in many of the places you would see, even we do it in academics as well, many times we end up doing it. We use heavy words which have no meaning. I mean, out of box, in box, edge of the box, end-to-end solutions, shareholder value, it means nothing to a common person. Yeah, of course, if you're sitting in a financial meeting and you talk about shareholder value, maybe the finance experts would be able to understand it. But would the common man understand that? No, they would not be. If you ask anybody on the streets, what is paradigm? What is innovation? What is value added? End-to-end solution means what? It means nothing. So eventually, we all have to keep in mind that as much as possible, not to use the bingo words, as I call them, right?
Hi, guys.
Shortest story ever told. We often do that as a part of our workshops when we do it. Since this is a more of a one-way street as a part of this session, I think one of the shortest stories which have been and many of you would know this particular story, is by Ernest Hemingway, For Sale Baby Shoes Never Worn. The possibilities of developing films after films, the stories after stories by just sheer 6 words is immense. Why this is immense and why this is so brilliant is because every word or every context of that word is loaded with possibilities. And I think simplicity of the story itself opens up our brain to the possibilities, what could have been. Why baby shoes which have never been worn are on sale? That question bogs you, and then suddenly you start imagining, you may be thinking about it. Now, this is just an illustration of how even the minimal words can change the perspectives on communication. It can make an impact on it. And that's why, I kind of put it out here is just to kind of illustrate how very minimal words usage, very minimal simple words can also turn into big stories. So there's some principles I wanted to share with you before I close. And these principles essentially works is, if you want to really move humans, right? The behavior part of it, as I said about, if you want to move humans to a big time, by just diagnosing the cognitive biases in people is not going to get you anywhere. Often we say, when you want to change people's behavior, I mean, whether you are mask, you have to wear the mask or you have to behave in a particular manner, we often kind of address the cognitive biases every time. We have logic, we have data, we have many illustrations, and we say we need to overcome these cognitive biases. But do you think by addressing only the cognitive biases would take you anywhere? It is not going to take you anywhere. What it needs is some level of a human storytelling, some level of a human storytelling. And this human storytelling, we often we call it in context to what we know as a availability heuristics and the concreteness. So this availability heuristics for humans essentially means that if you cannot picture something very concretely in your head, you would not place value to it. It is very, very important for us, or for that matter, communicator, that you need to create that level of competence in whatever we are communicating, that you should be able to place and create a picture in your head. If you're able to do that, then the person actually places some value to that particular situation. And I think that's a very important part of it. See what happens in case of climate change. People keep on talking about environmental disaster, climate change, climate change. Does it really make an impact? It does not make an impact. For a person who has not, what you call, experienced the climate change, for him or her, it doesn't mean anything. We may talk whatever we want to talk. So climate change is one very example. If for example, is somebody who stays in desert, in Saharan Africa, and you talk about climate change and show them the picture of polar bear on a melting ice, do you think it would matter to anybody who's staying in Sahara? They would not have experienced the kind of a polar meltdown which are happening and why the polar bears are getting extinct, why the climate change is happening. It would not mean anything. So I think one has to keep in mind that the grand challenges which we talk about in communication, in policy making, in many places means nothing until unless there's a availability and concreteness attached to it. So be concrete about what you're going to talk about. And I think that's a very, very important piece. When I say being concrete also is something, if I told you that there is a something concreteness about something, can you change your behavior? Can I change your behavior? Yes, putting something very specific, I think can definitely impact it. See how this particular film works and you'll understand where I am.
All the plastic water bottles we use in a year add up.
How's the run?
But 300 of them can be replaced with just one Brita filter.
It's good, thanks.
So if you see, this particular film was all about what? It is about, of course, this film has been, I mean, this portion which I showed it to you is from a commercial. But what I was trying to say is that if you tell somebody that if you're using too many plastic bottles, everybody using plastic bottles in the world, at some point of time, the entire planet would be covered with plastic. Now, if I keep on telling you, yes, you'll hear me out, but you'll never get impacted. Vis-a-vis, if I show you some way where the entire planet is covered, in fact, National Geographic had done a brilliant study on it also. If I put all the plastic bottles over the planet Earth, and I show you that they're plastic bottles, there is a greater concreteness too. Actually, this means this. And I think that is what I meant by this availability and concreteness as a part of your principle of storytelling. It is very important. Another thing which you should definitely keep in mind, and this is something which I learned also from someone, it's called as anthropomorphizing, right? Anthropomorphizing means nothing else but putting a human face to something. Many times you have concepts, you have situations, you have items which are non-animate. If you put a face to it, human face to it, and I think animators are brilliant at it. Doing this particular session as a part of MESC as well and GMAC, it's interesting because there's so much work is happening in this particular space. They put a human face on everything. They put a human face on flower, on a tree, on a plant, on a tire. I mean, look how beautifully it is able to do it. So anthropomorphizing is that particular ability. And I'll show you a brilliant, graceful example of how this particular thing happens. See how this works and you'll love this film.
I think it was always misunderstood. People just didn't seem to like me. I think I annoyed them. I got on their nerves. I don't know why. It was. Was intense. Maybe I came on too strong. I don't know. I really can't say. Yeah, it was lonely. Really lonely. But you get used to it after a while. And then one day, everything changed. Somebody finally accepted me for what I am. Since I've got this job, life is completely different. I finally feel useful, good at something.
You saw how brilliantly this particular piece came up. I mean, somebody would have said it's wind. We are talking about a wind. How do we show the wind? What do we do? Because you don't see the wind, you feel the wind. I mean, that's what it said. But if you are able to put a human face to wind, how powerful, if you gave a job to a wind, how powerful that particular proposition would become. So I think the ability to actually utilize these small things, because remember what I said earlier, our brain is trying to latch on to things which it can get associated with. If we are able to give the brain that particular thing, I think then the other's brain do respond. You are able to at least get them, create a bridge with them where they start to understand. Another concept which often is used as a part of storytelling for changing the behaviors is what we call as a temporal discounting, the time discounting. This was an experiment which was done in UK, where if you tell people in future the world would not be there, in future the temperature of the earth would go so much, there would be no oceans, nothing else would be left. If you tell people like this in future, well, do they do listen to you, but they're unable to place a premium to it. They're unable to understand, comprehend what you're talking about. Instead of that, if you're able to create that time discounting, if you take them to the future somehow, they are able to understand it very well. So what we did was to create that particular futuristic ocean, or the future of the world, of future oceans of the world for school kids, and show them what it is going to happen in the future if you're not very careful today as far as pollution is concerned. See this particular experiment which was done by a team from Ogilvy in UK.
I'm excited to see the penguins. I want to see the otters. I love the octopus. I'm excited to see the catfish. There should be millions of fish and 0% of plastic.
Now, this is something again very, very interesting, and I think that's why it becomes extremely important for us to be concrete as much as possible. And that's was the whole point of this availability heuristic which I talked about, or putting human face to something which is very specific, or temporal or time discounting to show the future which is very, very concrete is important for us. Another aspect which you have to, which is part of a principle, is what we call as a identifiable victim. Now, identifiable victim is, rather than telling a story of the society, look, this, if something happens, this is what would happen to the country. This is what would happen to the society at large. Well, people do relate to it, but please understand, you need to be very strict. Rather than telling a story of the society itself, tell a story of an individual. You would have seen in many times when you are told a story of one individual, you are able to get attached to that story much stronger than when you are told it from macro level, society level. So you need to have one person as a representative who you can identify with. I have a great example which I would love to show it to you. This example is from Google. See how it looks, and you'll understand why it is such a brilliant example.
In America, we believe
Sorry, I'm sorry. I just wanted to show you. Yeah, this example. So there are two examples actually I'm showing it to you. They are competitors. You'll see one in one example, you're talking the society. Other example is of an individual.
In America, we believe in a future that is better than today. Since 1894, Ameriprise Financial has been working hard for their clients' futures, never taking a bailout, helping generations achieve dreams, buy homes, put their kids through college, retire how they want to. Ameriprise, the strength of America's largest financial planning company, the heart of 10,000 advisors working with you, one-to-one, together for your future. In America,
Sorry. This is
Move
another
on
film.
might be a good word to exchange for change. You know, it's always moving on. It's kind of hard to make decisions by yourself all of a sudden when you've been making them with somebody else for 35 years. I had a wonderful, wonderful, happy marriage, and I was well loved, and so many people don't have that. Buddy, what's out there? Tom didn't leave very much, but he left me a little money, and I bought Deacon with the last of the money. He doesn't talk back, but he looks at me like he understands. Day one, first day of my retirement. First day I've never had to answer to anybody for anything.
I wanted to show you this is because these are two financial companies. One has talking about the US as a nation and insurance and so many other things, and the promise that the country would be better. Other is a story of this lady who has retired, had lost her husband, and still is trying to make up a good living for herself and is happy. So there's an identifiable single story of a lady, of an individual, vis-a-vis the society, the nation, the country, and everything else. So not every time the macro works. It's a micro and the detailing part of it, which the brain connects to much quicker than at the macro level, because then I'm able to concretize something and see exactly. Now, if you see another aspect of the direction is this.
you ready for your big party today? Huh?
This was a brilliant piece because, ideally speaking, when you're talking of technology, somebody would have given the brief to the creators of this film that I want to show to the world the seamless connectivity of my technology platform. But somewhere sitting there as a part of a creative team would have thought that why can't we chronicle a life of a dad and growing daughter and capture it on the platform of Google itself, the platform of Gmail itself, Chrome itself. I think there's a difference between providing logic and operationals and technology to it rather than a human side to it. I think this was just an example to show that even the most cold technology solution, so to say, can have a human face to it. It's a benefit which we as humans get it. And I think it was just an illustration of showing the identifiable or the person as a core and the center of any storytelling, or for that matter, and ensuring that there's an impact and behavior change. This is another thing which I wanted to kind of give you a sense of it. Many times when you want to work with understanding the brain and work with changing somebody's behavior, is to work with a situation where what we call as a in the prospect theory, you put a premium on loss rather than on winning. Many times we put a premium on more on the loss. So it's avoidance of the loss rather than wing in what human brain many times focuses. Now you can utilize it as this particular film on environmental by Greenpeace was done, where they partnered with Minecraft, the game, and they did it in Poland, where they created a game because the trees were being cut. They created a game where the trees were there for the future. And on one fine day, the game changed and they took away all the trees except for the one tree in that particular game. And there was a hue and cry that how come the entire Minecraft forest which was created has been demolished and a new game version has been launched which has only one tree. And suddenly you took away something from that situation, and the focus on that one tree came back, and the people realize how important it is for us to save the trees. And I think that is what I wanted to show you as a part of this film, which should be one of the last.
Przenieśliście Puszczę Białowieską do rzeczywistości wirtualnej. Myślę, że nie na stałe.
So this is what I wanted to share with all of you. It's a very long, kind of a workshop and a deck that we do often. Idea is, and this is more. This is meant for not just for communicators. Honestly speaking, this is meant for anybody who wants to tell a story. Tell a story in their own domain. You can be a lawyer. You can be a manager, as I said it. You can be a engineering or technologist. You can be a media person. You could be a humanities person. Wherever you are coming from, whatever your discipline and the career and the space is, I think it is important that the communication or the persuasion has to work very well in favor of what you're trying to communicate, or what you're trying to impress upon, or what you're trying to impact on. I think if you understand the brain part of it, which is very so connected to the stories part of it well, and you're able to deploy these learnings in a way which others are able to latch on to, understand it, I think it becomes easier for the audiences to understand, easier for the citizens and the communities to understand it, and they'll be able to take away many things out of it. And these were some of the principles which I wanted to share, which are very connected to what the science tells us. Important is that rather than just treating them as something not part of the core communication skills, if we are able to deploy it as a part of our working, as a part of a narrative, I think the effectiveness of communication and changing behaviors would improve. And this is being seen by across the world. This is just one instance that I wanted to share with you, or some points which I wanted to share with you. But a lot of work is happening in that space. And I think the future that way is extremely, extremely exciting, because more has to be discovered from that context and more has to be deployed as a part of it. I've always felt that whether it is journalism or filmmaking or advertising, policy making, even the storytelling for the lawyers, it works very, very well. Of course, the facts are very important. The truth is very important. But what if we were able to place storytelling at the center of everything that we do, use it intelligently, base your communication on honesty and ethics and the right things to be told? I think the results would be far superior than what we often, end up with. And I think that is what my take on, brain and behavior and stories is all about. So thank you so much for listening to me, and maybe I was able to contribute something to already existing knowledge, which all of you would have it. So thank you so much.
Hi, sir. Sorry, I was talking on mute. And so your videos that you have shown were so impactful that like they actually describe how human mind or the brain behavior works. And especially that one where the child is following the parents. I have recently seen that on social media platform, and it was so impactful that I've personally shared it on my profile as well.
Very good.
So, I'm so glad you have covered so many things in such short time, and describing about human brain behavior. Now it doesn't stays limited to media industry. It's for everybody.
Absolutely. Very true.
Thank you so much for this wonderful session. We really enjoyed it thoroughly, and we hope to meet you very soon again.
Absolutely.
And this is the future endeavors.
Absolutely.
At the same time, I'd like to mention about our upcoming webinar of this series, which is going to be the last one. Here we'll be talking to Dr. Ambrish Saxena on news on multimedia platforms. Now, like I have just mentioned about how that video coming on a social media made an impact on my mind and mind of others, millions, because it's there. So it's brilliant, sir. I'm
Thank
sure
you.
Ambrish sir's session is also much awaited one, and we all would love to see him. And thank you so much for your time today, sir. We hope you stay well. The weather is changing badly. I already have a sore throat.
Thank you so much, Pooja. You were you kind enough to host me and moderate this particular session, and I'm happy that we were able to get along with to be honest enough from MESC as well as GMEC. We're all together trying to disseminate as much as knowledge as possible, and I think this is a great platform to do it. And I'm sure that Professor Ambrish Saksena's session, knowing how good he is in his own work, would be brilliant, and we all would be looking forward to it and being a part of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Take care, stay well, and guys, join back on Monday for Dr. Ambrish Saxena. Till then, take care, enjoy. Bye.